athleticism, physical prowess, strength, stamina, agility, mobility. That's what we're going to talk about today. And more specifically, the ways in which this influences your ability to fight, the ways in which athleticism flows into fighting as a physical domain, in what ways it benefits you in your ability to fight, etc. In this video, we are going to focus on grappling. The next video is going to be about wrestling, and I'm going to make a third one on striking. Now, before we get into athleticism and its influence on grappling, why would I want to talk about a topic like this at all? What's the point? I think it's very valuable to take a little bit of a deep dive into athleticism and its relationship with these different aspects of fighting, because fighting in many ways is a good general gauge of physical capability. It covers a lot of different bases, and through looking at fighting, through taking an in-depth look at athleticism in relationship to fighting, I think you can draw a lot of conclusions about the types of training you might want to do, about the types of things you might want to incorporate into your training, and the aspects that might not be as important for general physical prowess, physical excellence, if you will, that is not tied to one specific skill area, one specific sport, but is generally applicable. So let's talk about grappling. And I think it makes sense to start by pointing out one thing. Depending on the level of clothing that is involved, skill is going to matter, relatively speaking, more or less. Now, at any stage, grappling skill is going to be relevant in this whole question. But if you are grappling against someone who is wearing a significant amount of clothing that offers opportunities to manipulate your opponent in different ways. You are grappling against someone who's wearing something that has long sleeves, that has a lapel that you can grab onto. I think a gi is a great example of a high level of controllability just through the clothing someone is wearing, because you've got long sleeves on the top and the bottom part of the gi. And then on top of that, you have lapels and a belt. So there are lots of different options to go for if you want to control and submit your opponent. Versus if you imagine a fighting or specifically a grappling scenario where you've got someone who is basically naked, okay, maybe wearing like sports shorts, or something like boxer shorts, essentially they're tighty whities, and that's it. Apart from that, they're completely naked. Of course, skill is still very, very relevant, very important, but relatively speaking, less so than it is with more clothing, because there are less opportunities to take advantage of, and so the baseline physicality of you and your opponent becomes much more important. This is going to go for wrestling as well. It's not as relevant for striking, but it is especially relevant for grappling, and I would argue to some extent even more so for wrestling. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next video. Now let's go ahead and look at the first thing most people probably think of when we're talking about physical prowess and something like grappling: strength and size. If we're looking at size in general, any kind of weight advantage, I would say yes, being bigger than your opponent is generally an advantage, but depending on how skilled your opponent is, probably not as much as a lot of people think. If you are significantly bigger than your opponent, but that is not really due to a lot of muscle mass. It's mostly that you're maybe a little bit taller and just significantly fatter than your opponent. That is not really going to be a huge advantage. It's going to make it harder for your opponent to move you around a little bit, but really is not going to make submissions much harder if your opponent is decently skilled and is able to work well from the bottom. There are tons of different things you can do, even from a disadvantageous position that you might get into because of a weight discrepancy. So just being heavier than your opponent, not really a huge deal. If you're fighting someone who is like marginally more skilled than you, it might be an advantage. But chances are, if you're really fat, that is probably going to take a toll on your endurance as well. And I'm not saying there are no fat people who also have incredible cardio that seems to almost defy their body type. People like that definitely exist. I've seen people wrestle and grapple for very long periods of time compared to what I would have thought them capable of. But certainly these people would probably have much better endurance than they already do if they weren't fat. And at the end of the day, I think what it really comes down to is that this extra weight is not just weight your opponent has to move around, it's also weight you have to move around. It's also weight that is going to take away from your mobility, from your ability to move smoothly. It's going to hinder you, not just in terms of your skill, but in terms of other aspects of your physical prowess, your athleticism. So all in all, just being heavier, slight advantage in some regards, but probably a bit of a disadvantage, honestly, in other aspects, especially to you, without talking about your opponent at all, really. Now, what about muscle-based size? So you've got a size advantage over your opponent that is based mainly on muscle mass. Now, this is a completely different story. I would say almost across the board, a very, very big advantage. One of the biggest things this is going to affect is the amount of opportunities your opponent will get to put you in an arm bar, put you in some kind of leg lock, get a chokehold in, anything of that nature. There are a lot of situations where an opportunity kind of presents itself. So your opponent makes a mistake, but it's not a big mistake. And by applying a little bit of force, in addition to your skill, in addition to doing the correct movements, using the correct techniques, you can get into an advantageous position or straight into a submission. But with a person that is significantly stronger, many of these situations are not going to work out. This is something I have noticed a lot because I am decently heavy and I am very, very strong for my weight. And what I've noticed when rolling against opponents that are significantly more skilled than me, but also significantly smaller than me, people like my coach, for example, who of course is way more skilled than I am, but also about 20 kilograms lighter, is that a lot of things they attempt to do will just not work out. What this really comes down to is the fact that you can brute force your way out of a lot of things if you notice them just early enough. And by just early enough, in some cases, we're talking about moments before they happen. I've been in situations where someone had an arm bar like 90 to 95% locked in and was pulling on my arm with both hands, but I noticed just in the nick of time what was happening, and I actually managed to muscle my way out of it with one arm, just pulling out of there. So even if you're in a very, very bad position, you're basically almost in the submission already, or in some cases you are in the submission hold and the guy is trying to pull you to the point of pain where you are starting to tap or you're going to get choked out. In many of these situations, you can still muscle your way out of there. Does this work 100% of the time? No, absolutely not. If someone has a deep rear naked choke or something like that sunk in, shit is over. There's nothing you can do in that position using your strength, because there are certain positions where you don't really have any muscles to do anything against what is happening. Your muscles pull in certain ways, they push in certain ways, they have specific movement patterns. And if you're being attacked from a position where there's essentially no muscle to resist that, really, you're fucked. But in most cases, if you notice what is going on a little bit before it happens to you, you can block a lot of attacks. You can prevent a lot of stuff from happening, and you can neutralize a pretty substantial level of skill that your opponent might have over you, a skill advantage, just using strength and muscle-based size. However, and this is a big factor here, this is mostly a defensive advantage. If your game is not good, if your game is severely lacking or basically non-existent, strength is not going to do much for you in terms of winning a grappling match. Because at the end of the day, you can use it to resist a lot of stuff that your opponent is trying to do to you, but this is not going to change the fact that you have to do something to your opponent. And if you don't know how to do that, you can resist a smaller, weaker, more skilled opponent for a very, very long time, and you can make them frustrated and block like 95% of their submission attempts and techniques and whatnot. But chances are their endurance is probably going to be better than yours. We're going to talk about endurance in a moment, but generally speaking, more muscle mass is going to burn more energy. So there's a good chance they have better endurance than you. They're going to stay relatively fresh in terms of stamina, in terms of their gas tank, for a longer period of time. And if you roll long enough with them, at some point or another, there is going to be an opportunity that presents itself that is good enough for them to capitalize on it. What's also important here is if an opportunity does present itself, they do have to be much more precise when capitalizing on it. So not only do they have less opportunities against you if you're significantly stronger, they also have to be a lot more perfect in their approach to utilizing an opportunity. But that is going to happen sooner or later. And again, chances are, like all things equal, except for this muscle-based size difference, you're probably going to have slightly worse stamina on average. If you're a bigger guy, even if that size is almost exclusively based on muscle mass, you're not fat or anything, chances are your endurance is worse. So if the roll goes on for long enough, if we assume the roll continues until one person wins, until one person submits the other, you are probably getting choked out or put in some kind of joint lock. Because you can prevent 90%, maybe 95%, depending on how much bigger and stronger you are than your opponent, of submission attempts, but you're not going to prevent 100% if the match goes on long enough. And your strength is not going to give you any ability to attack the opponent. Now, this is going to look a little bit different if you have a little bit of game. As soon as skill enters the picture, strength is an even bigger deal, in my opinion, because the same way it makes your opponent have to work much harder and be much more precise and meticulous in their application of skill and technique, Strength does the exact opposite for you. If you have a little bit of skill, using the techniques using the techniques, few as they may be, that are in your repertoire, is going to be way easier for you. To the point where I was rolling with my coach yesterday, and there was essentially like a split second moment where I had a chance to kind of sort of get at his back. And that was enough for me to eventually get him into a rear naked choke. Now, this was not a great opportunity because the guy has very, very, very good ground game. Okay. So it's not like he presented his back to me, even for like a split second. It was sort of I kind of sort of managed to get at his back type of situation. But the crazy thing is, that was enough. It was enough for me to get one hook in. I had my left leg wrapped around him, and I had my right arm sort of over his shoulder, reaching over here and grabbing somewhere around his pec. And then after a few moments, I managed to kind of push my hand under his armpit and lock in a seatbelt sort of grip. But in the first couple of moments, I just had one leg and one arm around him, which is not a very secure position. And I think if I had been an opponent who is anywhere close to his weight, even if I had been a little bit more skilled than I am, he would have gotten out of there. But the fact of the matter is that the strength discrepancy between us is so extreme, right? I've got about 20 kilos on my coach, and at least 50, 60% of that is muscle mass. The guy is a little bit shorter than me. He's a little bit more shredded, but I'm relatively lean. So the majority of that excess weight is straight up muscle mass, and that translates into strength like crazy. And this is not even considering the fact that, again, compared to most people my weight, I am pretty strong as well. So because of this fact, even in this very flimsy position, he was not able to get out. He was trying to turn, he was trying to fight my arm. He was actually fighting that right arm of mine with both hands while trying to twist out of there with his body. And he was not able to do it. And slowly but surely, very sloppily, very comfortably, I was able to just roll on my side, get both hooks in after a while, and sink that rear naked choke in. And not because by any means I am more skilled than this guy. In fact, I am far inferior to him in terms of actual grappling, but because strength allows you to be way more sloppy with your technique, because you can just brute force a lot of things. If you know technically how to choke someone out with like a triangle, as long as you know how that works and you're strong enough, you can just force your opponent into that position. You can skip over a lot of positional plays, over a lot of transitions, a lot of techniques that would allow you to get into something like a triangle choke in the first place. You can just skip over that. You can have like a slightly advantageous position, and from there, just force your opponent into the submission you want in a lot of cases. And of course, as always, this depends on how big the skill discrepancy is and how big the muscle-based size and strength discrepancy is. Certainly, if your opponent is skilled enough, like if his skill is in a completely different realm to yours, and you're only, let's say, like 5 to 10 kilograms heavier than this guy is, and again, maybe 50, 60% of that is muscle mass, but this guy's like a jiu-jitsu black belt, and you have grappled 3 times in your life, he's going to fuck you up. Easy. Definitely. But if you're like a decently trained white belt, and your opponent is a blue belt or a purple belt, and you've got 20 kilograms on him, and you're like the same body fat percentage, things might look a little different. And, some of them roles might go your way. So to kind of conclude this a little bit, strength, muscle-based size, huge advantage in the world of grappling. It can be outclassed by skill if the skill gap is big enough, but it does compensate for a very substantial level of skill, to the point where, again, you might be able to roll with people 1 or 2 belts above you, and it could be a pretty even match. What I just talked about, I think, is an even bigger deal if we leave the world of grappling as a sport. If we're not talking about a BJJ grappling match, right? We're not talking about a roll. And we are instead talking about grappling as a part of fighting, of general fighting, something like an MMA match or even a real world hand-to-hand combat situation. Strength becomes even bigger of an advantage. Why? Because there are other ways of attacking your opponent, which means the whole question of skill that I talked about, not as big of a deal, right? If strength allows you to very effectively fight off an opponent's grappling attempts, which I think if you're not skilled at all, you're not going to see a lot of things coming. But if you have a very rudimentary understanding of grappling, even if you're not good at it, that can already be enough to make strength a very, very viable defense against skill. And again, if we're in a situation where you don't have to choke out or submit your opponent in some way, you don't have to put them in an arm bar, you don't have to put them in a rear naked choke, you don't have to finish them grappling style. You can punch them, you can smash them into stuff, etc. Being able to just defend against grappling is a huge deal. Because if strength is enough to prevent you from getting your arm snapped or getting slept by a choke, that might already be sufficient. You might not need any grappling to defeat this opponent who is inferior to you in terms of muscle mass. Maybe all you need to do is nullify their grappling with your strength, and that might be enough to just sit on top of them and smash them into the fucking ground. Again, of course, it depends on how much stronger are you compared to your opponent and how skilled is your opponent compared to you. But in terms of a grappling match versus grappling in an actual fight, I think strength is an even bigger advantage in the grappling department in an actual fight, because just its defensive capabilities are a huge fucking deal. Now, before we get into the next aspect of athleticism that most people probably associate with combat sports, which is endurance, let's briefly talk about different types of strength, which is actually a sort of transition from the strength and size category into the topic of endurance. Because of course we have more explosive strength, and then we have strength endurance, which is already kind of moving into the endurance direction as well. All right, had to go kill a fly real quick. This was starting to feel like that fucking Breaking Bad episode where there's this one fly in the lab that they're trying to hunt down. I'm talking to the camera and this fucking fly is buzzing about right above my head. Anyways, where was I? Explosive strength and strength endurance. I would say that explosive strength is mostly advantageous for offense. There are some situations where you're able to use explosive strength to get out of certain positions. But generally speaking, explosive strength is going to be a lot more important for forcing your opponent into positions they don't want to be in than it is for resisting their offensive attempts. A solid strength endurance, so a very decent level of strength that you can consistently maintain over longer periods of time, both actively resisting and then also over the course of many minutes. So maintaining a decent level of strength over time as the roll goes on. Both of those are going to be much more important for the defensive aspect I talked about. So if your skill level is very, very low, I think strength endurance is going to be more advantageous. As you get more skilled, explosive strength is going to be very valuable for forcing your opponent into certain submissions, though. So if you're like a low-level grappler, but you do have some grappling skill, explosive strength is going to be very valuable. If you have virtually no skill at all, or like just enough skill to prevent a lot of submissions from happening, the sort of situation I talked about earlier, strength endurance, probably more so your friend. And strength endurance is going to remain an important factor even as you get more and more skilled, because it's just going to allow you to hold out longer as well. Even if you're relatively gassed, even if your stamina is depleted and you're starting to get pretty fucking tired, if you have decent strength endurance, if you have a decent level of sort of consistent strength that's always there, that is not super intense, super hardcore in any individual moment, but it's a sort of decent level of resistance, that's going to be a very, very big deal. And I can definitely say that specifically training my smaller motor units, training my slow twitch muscle fiber, has had a huge impact on my ability to resist very aggressive opponents, even when I'm pretty fucking tired. Where before, I was very strong, I could force a lot of stuff, but when I did tire out and I didn't have a lot of my explosive strength left, I would get put in chokeholds and whatnot, fucking ankle locks and whatever the fuck my opponent wanted to do to me. Whereas now, even when I'm like breathing heavy, really panting, really I'm fucking out of it, there's a lot of shit I can still resist very, very consistently with those smaller motor units, with those strengthened slow twitch muscle fibers. So let's go ahead and summarize this part so we can move on to endurance. Both explosive strength and strength endurance are very, very valuable for grappling, but I do think strength endurance might be a little bit more important, and explosive strength is definitely going to be more valuable to someone who actually has a bit of skill. If your skill level is extremely low, you're still going to benefit from explosive strength, no question about it, but you're probably going to get more of that defensive benefit out of strength endurance, out of having strengthened your slow twitch muscle fiber and your ability to exert a consistent level of strength over long periods of time. And as we're talking about long periods of time, let's get into endurance, into stamina, into your cardiovascular ability to keep going. Hugely important. Really, really big deal. I will say, however, that I think endurance is very much a complementary attribute when it comes to grappling. Endurance itself is not going to do much for you if you don't have a significant level of either strength or skill, or a sort of moderate, decent level in both. If you're not a very strong, muscular guy, but you do have a substantial amount of skill compared to your opponent, and you also have great endurance, you can do what I mentioned earlier. You can keep grappling against them, a lot of opportunities you're not going to be able to capitalize on, or you have to be very precise. So if you make any mistakes, you're going to miss those opportunities because the other person is stronger than you. But due to your skill, you can avoid getting put in any kind of submission hold yourself, and you can keep attempting to land some kind of submission. You can keep trying, you can keep attacking, and if you have that endurance, you can just keep going, essentially trial and error, try to, find opportunities, try to capitalize on them as perfectly as possible, and sooner or later, something is going to stick. Vice versa, if you don't have a ton of skill, but you have like the bare minimum that's required to kind of defend against some stuff, and you do have a significant muscle-based size and strength advantage over your opponent, if you also have really, really good endurance, you might be able to tire them out by just defending against them to the point where they are going to gas out. Now, if you have no ability to submit them, you're still not going to be able to win a grappling match, even though in some cases, if you really gas out your opponent, you might just be able to lie on top of them in a way that is so uncomfortable that they might just tap. But if we're talking about grappling in a general fight situation, so grappling as an aspect of a complete fight, huge advantage. Your endurance is going to mean that you can consistently defend against these grappling attempts, against the grappling offense of your more skilled but less strong opponent. And if you do have the endurance advantage over them, you can do this consistently, just tire them out. And as they get more and more tired, you can finish them some other way. You can just, even without any advanced striking or wrestling technique, you can just pick them up and smash them into stuff, or just punch them intuitively until the lights go out, right? So endurance is a very, very big, you could say, force multiplier. It's not literally force you're multiplying, but sort of combat ability multiplier, you could say. But it's not really worth a ton on its own. Endurance is kind of useless as an attribute on its own. Where strength, if you have like a moderate level of endurance, like a sort of bare minimum of endurance, and you have a lot of strength on your opponent, it's still going to be a big deal. It's going to do a lot for you. It might not be enough to defeat a very, very skilled opponent, but it's definitely going to give you a significant advantage compared to not really having a ton of strength, but having exceptional endurance. If that's your situation and your opponent has worse endurance than you, but they are more skilled than you, and you're kind of on the same footing, a similar footing in terms of muscle mass, what are you going to do? Nothing. So endurance is great, but it's only great in combination with something that allows you to act, to do something, anything, offense or defense. Now, before we move on to the next attribute, the next part of athleticism, I do think it makes sense to look at different aspects of endurance as we did with strength. And in my opinion, there are three parts in particular that we should look at, which is your sort of baseline endurance, your ability to do a little bit of work over an extended period of time, which is the kind of endurance you would train with something like steady state cardio. Your more immediate stamina, so your ability to do something intense for an extended period of time, which is something you would train with sprints, that type of thing. And related to both of these, sort of connected to both these aspects of endurance, your ability to recover. So your ability to regain some of your stamina, regain some of your endurance over as short a period of time as possible. And as with strength, I would say that the more intense type of endurance you get out of more intense cardio training, things like sprints, again, is more valuable for someone who does have a certain level of skill and is able to go on the offensive. Whereas more consistent endurance, the ability to kind of keep going a little bit, not be super intense, but do a little bit of work, do a little bit of pushing here, pulling there over a very, very long period of time is probably going to be more important if you're banking on the type of situation I described where you have a significant strength advantage, but the other guy is way more skilled and you're just trying to defend. So defensively, I would say probably this sort of consistent, more low level, low intensity endurance is more important. Offensively, if you do want to be aggressive, if you do want to use a lot of explosive strength, for example, which we talked about earlier as well, that's going to go much better with this more immediate stamina that allows you to utilize a lot of energy for a slightly longer period of time. If you can really use a lot of force for even a couple seconds longer than the other person, that can be enough to brute force a submission or something of the sort. And then I would say your ability to recover some stamina, some endurance. Fucking bells going off. Never mind, I'm just going to keep talking. Your ability to recover a little bit of stamina over as short a period of rest as possible, incredibly important. Because there will be situations, if you have, again, a decent level of skill or a decent level of strength that your opponent does not, where you get to rest a little bit. Again, stamina, endurance, on its own, pretty useless. But if you do have that strength advantage or you do have that skill advantage to allow you to utilize your endurance, you might be able to get into a position where just for a couple of seconds, 10 seconds, maybe just 5 seconds, 4 or 3, you are relatively safe. And if you have the ability to quickly regain your stamina, that is going to be a huge deal because it is going to allow you, for example, if you like to use that explosive strength to go on the offense, to do that much more often. You can aggressively push your opponent, really press them, maybe use that to get into a position that's slightly advantageous for you, where you can chill out for a couple of seconds, use either your superior skill or your strength endurance to maintain that position with relatively low effort. And if you can quickly recover your stamina within a couple of seconds, a very short period of time, you can then again use a very significant amount of force to continue to move on from that advantageous position. So I would say more immediate stamina, very valuable for offense. Your sort of baseline endurance, the ability to do a little bit of work for a very, very long period of time, more important for defense, for staying in the game. If you don't manage to submit your opponent or you're not actually really capable of grappling in terms of submitting your opponent at all. And then your ability to recover, I think, all around very valuable. It's also going to allow you to use a lot more power to push out of problematic positions. So in the situations where you can use explosive strength to get out of a bad spot, this ability to then quickly recover your stamina also going to be very, very valuable. Next up, we have agility. What I mean by agility is your sort of intuitive ability to move your body well. It's one thing to be very strong. It is another thing to intuitively do movements in an efficient way. People who are very agile generally have a much easier time learning specific techniques in sports. And when they move outside of specific techniques, specific skills, it's a lot smoother. It's a lot more elegant. It's a lot more energy efficient and power efficient. Agility includes different things: balance, your spatial awareness overall, how in tune you are with your entire body. So not just hand-eye coordination, but how coordinated are the parts of your body that are not your hands, which are very connected to your consciousness, or maybe outside of your field of view even. How good are you at moving parts of your body that you can't actually see right now, or you can never see? And I would say that agility in many ways is quite similar to endurance. It's going to be a great addition to something that allows you to do stuff. Agility without skill or strength is not going to do a ton for you, but it will do a little bit more than endurance. The reason being that endurance is essentially worthless if you don't have any skill or any strength on your opponent, but agility might allow you to squirm out of some situations, to flow out of some situations. Agility is also, and this is quite relevant, I think, going to make it much easier to learn grappling in the first place. So if we're talking about acquiring skills, utilizing your athleticism not just to complement skills or to cancel out the skill of your opponent, but we're talking about getting better at grappling skills, agility is going to be a great advantage, because someone who is very agile, who is just very in touch with his body, consciously and subconsciously, is going to be much better at learning grappling moves. He's going to have a much better understanding when he watches his coach show something on the mat of how that translates to his own movement. People who are very agile are really, really good at learning things like dancing or martial arts or all these different types of things, because intuitively they understand how a movement works, what is going on sort of physiologically when someone shows a movement to them. So in terms of learning grappling, agility is a huge advantage. In terms of actually fighting someone, in terms of grappling as a sport or grappling in the context of fighting in general, man, my voice is starting to give out a little bit. In terms of agility in an actual confrontation, it will be beneficial to be agile. You're just going to be even more effective in what you're doing, right? You're going to use your strength or your skill more effectively and more efficiently. If you are very skilled, you're going to have to think less about what you're doing because your body is going to move more intuitively. But on its own, it's not going to do much for you. So in some ways, it's like endurance. It's going to be supplemental, and it has a lot of value as a bonus. It's going to be a huge combat ability multiplier again, but it's not going to do much for you if you're very agile. Even if you're very agile and have great endurance, but you don't have any strength and you don't really have any skill, you're going to be kind of fucked. There's not much you can do. And then finally, I want to briefly touch on mobility. Some people might count mobility as a part of agility. I would see it as a different thing. Agility is really about your connection to your body, the way you feel in relation to your body. Again, things like spatial awareness, balance, that type of thing, the way you move your body. Mobility is more so your ability to move your body into certain positions, in certain ranges of motion. Mobility is not really an active thing. You can, of course, actively train it, but mobility is more so just a general capability, right? I can either move my arm over there or I can't. And I can stretch, I can work on my mobility to get there, but in the moment when I'm fighting someone, either I have a certain level of mobility or I don't. It's really that simple. And the reason why I'm only going to touch on mobility briefly is because it's just a straight up advantage. Mobility is huge in grappling. And I would actually, to an extent, put it on par with strength. Now, I think having a huge strength advantage is going to be a bigger deal than having a huge mobility advantage, because at the end of the day, you're still a human. You are limited in the ways you can move. But if you have an opponent who has a significant lack of mobility, who is very stiff, who has very short ranges of motion, right? Very tight muscles, and you have an incredible level of mobility, there are actually quite a few submission attempts that probably just won't work on you. Similarly to how someone with a lot of strength can resist and brute force out of a lot of submission attempts, if you have an absurd level of mobility, you might be able to slip out of a lot of stuff. Or option two, and I've actually experienced this myself to a degree where I was a little bit dumbstruck, someone might be pulling on your arm or trying to choke you out, and because of your range of motion, because of your mobility, it's just not working. I actually forgot to mention this in relation to size and strength, but this can actually be the case there as well if we're talking about chokes. If you have a very muscular neck, that might actually be a problem for your opponent trying to choke you out as well. There are certain choking techniques that are not going to work as well on someone who is very, very muscular, has a very muscular neck, or big traps as well are going to be a problem for certain chokes from certain angles. When it comes to joint locks, though, mobility is on another fucking level in this regard. Not only are you going to be able to slip out of a ton of shit, again, some stuff is just not going to work on you. And this can become a real problem for your opponent because he's going to have to try a different submission or try doing the submission he's attempting in a different way, from a different angle. And depending on the position you're in, this can be an issue because he might have already invested a lot of effort into getting you there. Now he's got you in a submission hold. He's got that shit locked in. He is fucking 100% confident that he got you, and it doesn't work. You're not tapping. That shit doesn't hurt. And suddenly you're slipping out of it. He's like, what's going on? I had this guy in an omoplata. I had this guy in an armbar. I'm 100% certain I had him secured. Not only is this guy not tapping, he's starting to, by some miracle, slip out of my fucking hold. He's slithering out of my hands like a snake, like a fucking trout. So, mobility, great for defense, very, very valuable. Also great for offense. Mobility is going to allow you to utilize your strength and skill to a much more significant degree. You're going to be able to attack from angles, attack in ways that other people just can't. And it might actually catch your opponent by surprise because a guy who is very muscular looks strong. You're kind of expecting a superior level of strength. But mobility is not necessarily a trait you can see. Yes, generally speaking, people who are not very big might be a little bit more mobile. But that's not necessarily the case. People can be very, very thin and still have bad mobility. And people can be quite muscular and still have a surprising level of mobility for the muscle mass they are carrying. So mobility might really surprise your opponent, catch your opponent off guard. And I've seen some crazy shit. Like, if your opponent is all the way up here and holding you in some sort of side control or something, and you're able to reach up there with your legs, which are super strong compared to your arms, and start pulling your opponent off you, your opponent who's up here, right? Like upper chest head area, you're able to pull them back with your fucking legs that you're using to reach all the way around. That's a huge advantage. And that's something that a lot of people can't do. They're just not capable of that. They don't have the mobility to reach up there with their legs. So a high level of mobility unlocks a whole slew of different stuff that you can do. You just have more options. It's almost comparable to skill in that way. So yeah, mobility, very, very big deal across the board, just great for grappling. And I think if you only have mobility, probably not as good as having a significant muscle-based size and strength advantage. That's probably better. But if you do have some strength or some skill on your opponent, mobility is a huge fucking deal. Really big fucking deal. And it's definitely also valuable if you don't have either of those. If you're equally skilled or even a little bit less skilled, and you're moderately strong, comparable to your opponent, maybe even a little bit weaker, mobility is still going to be very, very valuable, as opposed to, again, endurance or agility, which are really more valuable if you've already got something going for you, even if it's not skill. That's going to be it for this video. I don't know how long this is going to be, but I've been recording for over a fucking hour. So yeah, it's been a long fucking time since I've recorded this long, and I'm starting to lose my voice a little bit. So let's finish this off. If you guys enjoyed yourselves, if you found this interesting, inspiring, you learned something valuable that you can incorporate into the way you design your training, go ahead and leave a like down below. If you're interested in building a generally athletic physique, a body of the gods, a powerful barbarian physique like mine, which is strong, ooga booga, but also has quality endurance, has good agility, mobility, all that good stuff, go ahead and check out the Primal Physique course down below in the description. As always, the course is over on Coffee, comprehensive program that includes information on making training a habit at all in your life, how to program your training, how to set up a nutrition plan, different habits that you should incorporate into your life aside from sort of classic endurance and strength training that are going to improve your athletic capability. You're going to learn how to consistently progress on your training and diet as well as you attempt to lose or gain weight. So it's really an all-around course for every aspect of what you might need to build that divine fucking beastly physique, that body you want and need for your athletic endeavors. Go ahead, check out the course. If you're interested in personal coaching, more of a personalized approach, you want maybe an individualized training program, you can also go ahead and hit me up either on Coffee or on Instagram, which is also down below in the description. And we can talk details over there, talk about what you want and need, so we can get you some results in the athletic department in that fashion. If you want to see more videos of mine in the future, go ahead and subscribe. It's free, so just go ahead, click that subscribe button. If you're interested in fitness, in training, in general health, in some aspects of philosophy as well, a holistic approach to men's fitness, if that's something you're into, go ahead, subscribe down below, and as always, activate the notification bell if you want notifications. That's going to be it. My voice is fucking gone. I'll see you guys in the next video, which is going to be on athleticism as it relates to wrestling. And until then, have a good one.